worked. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to talk for like 10, 15 minutes and just set up this new series that we're diving into. And then we'll take like a quick 2-minute water break, we can grab a snack, and then I'm going to talk for a little bit more and just set up our self-reflection time and what we can kind of focus on during that time. But I do want to kick us off on this series. So how about this graphic, by the way? That was all Bailey. Can we give it up for Bailey? And Britt. Let's go. Yeah, and Britt, definitely. But thank you, Canva. I don't know if you've ever used Canva, but it's like wonderful. Even I can make something look kind of cool. But so watch how I do it. Stories from the life of Jesus is the name of our series. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, I was so hyped on this like title that we came up with. I was like, this would be so cool. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, we are a Christian church, and so to be starting like the new year on a series focused on Jesus, like it's not that creative. Like it's not that original, right? And so it's not that original, but it does make sense, right? Like we are a Christian church, so it does make sense to start on Jesus. I don't know why I Googled this, but I Googled the definition, like the Google definition of Christianity, and you guys don't do this in your free time. It literally says a religion based on the person and teachings of Jesus. Right? So it's definitely not original at all. I definitely take credit for that. But it does make sense that we would start the new year as a Christian young adult group looking at the person of Jesus. And honestly, the main thing I wanted to cover tonight is before we dive into the series, I really wanted to answer the question of why Jesus. Even though it's not super original and it does make sense, I feel like it's still worth kind of answering that question of why Jesus. And honestly, if you go through any like business book or leadership book, like coaching book, everyone, I feel like the common theme that always comes up is like, everyone needs to know the why. They need to know why you're doing it. They need to know why you're doing it. So I wanted to answer that question tonight. But before I do answer it, I did want to acknowledge there's some other people that we could have looked at stories from their life that would have been super interesting. The first one I thought of was Michael Jordan. Did anyone watch this over the summer? Did you tune in? I was glued to my TV. I was looking at it. There's 10 episodes, so we're going to do 7 Thursday nights this winter in this series. So we could actually do all 10 episodes. If we doubled up on a few and then just we could make through the whole series. Another one. Has anyone heard of this? Masterclass? Has anyone actually taken one of the classes? No. I still haven't met someone that's taken it, but they offer online classes taught by just like celebrities, basically. Their slogan is, our instructors are the best in the world. I got lost on their website. I was just like looking at all their classes that I know this is a total sidebar, but stick with it. You can learn how to skateboard from Tony Hawk. You can learn how to cook from Gordon Ramsay. You can learn how to sing from Christina Aguilera. That could be you. Learn how to act from Samuel L. Jackson. Learn business from the Starbucks guy, Howard Schultz. And this is the one that I think I might sign up for. It's How to Play Basketball by Steph Curry. So, dude, watch out. When we're out there, I'm going to be like dunking. That's going to be awesome. But this was the last one. Time Magazine always coming out with these lists. And I thought it was so interesting. Some of the people that we could have covered, like Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, Isaac Newton, Elizabeth I of England, Queen Victoria, William Shakespeare, Napoleon, all these super interesting people that we could have covered for 7 nights this winter. But we are going to cover Jesus. And actually, the person that was number 1 on that Time Magazine list, the official title of the list was Time Magazine's Most Significant Figures in History. The number 1 person on that list actually was Jesus. So, I want to answer this question. Why Jesus? And, honestly, there could be several answers to this question. From he had a miraculous birth, and that's why we want to look at him for 7 nights, or he healed people, or he walked on water, he was a perfect human, he claimed to be God's son. Like, there's several things about Jesus' life that could have been the reason why we want to cover him for 7 nights this winter. But honestly, the one that I landed on, and I'll talk more about it, but why Jesus is because he rose from the dead. That's the answer that I landed on, is why do we want to look at Jesus? It's because he rose. And, Michael Jordan hasn't done that yet. He might still. I don't know. Those other people, bro, like they haven't done something like that. So it's really something that stood out to me. Jesus, he actually, let's think about this for a second. He actually predicted his death and that he would rise from the dead. And then he actually pulled it off. I heard one person say it like this: if someone predicts their own death and resurrection and pulls it off, I go with what that person says. Which is probably some good advice, right? So they don't haunt you or something. But, so, why is Jesus rising from the dead such a big deal? Like, why is that the answer that I landed on for why we should focus on him? And there's really 2 things that came to my mind. Jesus rising from the dead is the event that all of Christianity rests on. And it is what made him into the Jesus that we actually know today. I want to share a little bit more about each of these points, but that first one, it is the event that all of Christianity rests on. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then Christianity actually isn't true. This would just be a social club that you come on Thursday nights or Sunday morning and hang out at, and I would probably still come, but but it would that's all it would be. It wouldn't be any more than that. And tonight I'm not going to get into like the whole theological weeds of all the implications of Jesus' resurrection. But has anyone ever read the book or watched the movie, The Case for Christ? That Allie, one person, thanks, Colin. I watched the movie. I did not read the book, so I can't. The movie actually was decent, though. It was like not a super corny Christian movie, but it was decent. So I would actually recommend it, though. It's basically the story of an investigative reporter from Chicago that really dove into the evidence of. He really tried to disprove the resurrection of Christ, and it kind of follows his journey. It's super interesting. I'd recommend it if you haven't seen it. And then actually this series that we're going to be on, it ends 1 week before Easter, which is the celebration of Jesus rising from the dead. And so we're going to get into more details towards Easter and towards the end of this series. So we're going to talk more about that. But that second point. It is what made Jesus it is what made him into the Jesus we know today. So nowadays, it's pretty tough to find someone, especially in this area, like the United States. It's pretty tough to find someone that hasn't ever heard of Jesus, right? He's very famous. I mean, one example is every December 25th in the United States, everything is shut down because we are celebrating his birth. Literally, even around the world, though, there's over 2 billion people that claim to be Christians around the world, which is about 1/3 of the world's population. So he's pretty well known around the entire world. If more than 2 billion people are committed to following you. But it really wasn't always that way. Like, that's kind of the context that we have, is like, oh yeah, everyone knows Jesus, blah, blah, blah. But it really wasn't always that way, especially when he was on earth. And so I wanted to just do a quick, snapshot, little Jesus history snapshot of just what was it like when he was on earth, and kind of show that he was kind of an average Joe when he was here on this earth. And not so much as, he was definitely not as famous as he is nowadays. So a couple things I wanted to highlight. He wasn't rich. During his life, he wasn't very famous. He wasn't royalty or born into an influential family. He was actually born to a super average, of the time, working class Jewish family. His parents were Mary and Joseph. Mary gave birth to him in a town named Bethlehem. You might have heard the story at Christmas. We always like see the little manger scene, right? And Bethlehem is actually a real place. I want to show it on the map. So I want to highlight Israel in case any of us were like, I'm not really super familiar with the map. But okay, next one. And so Bethlehem, it's actually about 6 miles outside of Jerusalem, which is in Israel. And you want to know a fun fact about Bethlehem that I learned while I was doing this? It actually has a KFC. So, Bethlehem, Jesus might have started this KFC. No, he didn't. But, so, Jesus, he was born in Bethlehem. His family eventually moved to the town of Nazareth, where he worked with his dad as a carpenter, building things out of wood and stone. Until his young adulthood, towards the end of his young adulthood, about 30, he chose to make a career transition. Jesus decided to not continue in the family business of carpentry and decided to instead go into being a traveling teacher. And he had some success in that profession and started to build a decent following, but it was cut short. He offended the wrong people, and 3 years into his career of being a traveling teacher, he was arrested, and those people actually sentenced him to death by crucifixion. And after he was arrested, a lot of those people that were following ended up just bailing on him anyways. And so he really ended up dying, nailed to a cross, with only his mom and a few friends there by his side. So, something had to have happened for him to go from this pretty lonely death on a cross 2,000 years ago to now, like I said, over 2 billion people have committed their lives to following him, and you'd be pretty hard pressed to go anywhere and not know someone that hasn't at least heard of them. So what was the event that happened in between those two? And you might see where I'm going with this, but really the game changer, the event that happened was that he rose from the dead, and he visited people. Him rising from the dead, it was the spark that set flame to all of his followers and now has become this over 2 billion people. Jesus is one of the most famous people ever. So the question, I think I have it again. So why Jesus? Why are we going to look at Jesus for 7 Thursday nights this winter? It is because he rose from the dead. It really is that big of a deal, and it's one of those things that it's definitely worth spending 7 Thursday nights, at the beginning of 2021 to look at stories from his life. Okay, so let's. What I want to do now is just take a quick water break, grab a LaCroix, grab some chips, and then we'll come back in like 2 minutes. And I'm just going to lay out, kind of set the stage for our reflection time, and then we'll dive into that. So go ahead. Okay, I'm going to just set the stage for us before we go into our reflection time, and just give us some things to think about before we do it. And, this whole series, it really wouldn't be impactful or honestly worth it if we don't... it's only beneficial if we make this personal to our own lives and our own situation, and then also apply it to our lives. And so, 2 ways I want to set us up to do that is, one, by acknowledging the spectrum of beliefs about Jesus that we just have in this one room. So I want to dive into that a little bit more, and then also highlighting what Jesus has to say to each of us, no matter where we're at on that spectrum of beliefs about him right now. So, first thing is to acknowledge that spectrum of beliefs. So, I totally, we have this one group that would be, to some of us, what I've shared about Jesus already tonight it's not new information. You are bought in, you've committed your life to following that. And then there's a second group that maybe everything that I've shared, it's super foreign or new to you, and you're not sure what to think about this guy, Jesus. And then there's basically the third group that is everything in between. Maybe you've heard some of this, maybe you've heard most of it, but you haven't made a decision about Jesus or whether or not to commit your life to him. And honestly, something I want to make super clear is wherever you're at on that spectrum, you are definitely in the right place. And we're so glad that you're here because we're all in this together. So the second thing that I want to dive into is, okay, no matter where we're at on that spectrum, welcome, no matter where we're at on that spectrum, what does Jesus have to say to us personally? And, let's speak to that first group. You can go ahead and do it. The not new, I'm committed to following Jesus already. So if you relate more with this group, this is just one thing, and these are also on the sheet if you want to follow along, but here's just one thing that Jesus has to say to you. I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So every time I share, I'm going to share what Jesus has to say, and then I also want to just share maybe a suggested thing for you to be thinking about tonight and as we go into this whole series. And for this first group of people, here's some things to think about. What are your skills? What are your passions? What are your interests? And how can you use those to love God and people and make disciples? Bailey said in our announcements, and every time we meet, we're going to share those announcements about G2, GKW. Do you want to get more involved? Do you want to serve with high schoolers, middle schoolers, kids ministry? Do you want to get more involved in the young adults ministry? The missional partners that we're going to share about we're going to focus on one every month. Maybe that's where your passion is at, and you want to get more involved there. The second thing is, who are you doing life with? Who are you investing in? Do you have a desire to go deeper in the things that we talk about on Thursday nights? Well, a small group is a beautiful place to do that. Do you want to join a small group? Do you want to start a small group? If that is something that you're interested in, then you can definitely go to our website for more information. Okay, let's go to the second group. If you relate more to the second group, this is new and foreign, stranger danger. Who is this Jesus guy? This is something Jesus has to say to you. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And here's something to be thinking about. Is your life full? Are you lacking anything? If so, does what Jesus offers have the potential to fill that lack? He says it does. Are you interested or up for putting his offer to the test? And then lastly, that third group, the in-between on the spectrum. If you're somewhere in the middle, you necessarily haven't committed your life to Jesus, but you haven't ruled him out either. Here's something he has to say to that group. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And here's some things that, if you relate more with that group, this is some things you could be thinking about is, what gives you rest and refuels you? Have you found something that gives you a real rest that Jesus is talking about? Something that gives rest for your soul no matter the external circumstances. That's a big caveat. Are you willing to fully trust Jesus to receive that real rest? So these are just some thoughts, some questions for us to ponder. And I kind of laid out for you just generic questions at the top of that form. For when we go into this self-reflection time, we can be thinking about this. Where do we fall on that spectrum? How did we get there? And kind of what's our next step? Okay. This is my last thing before we go into our self-reflection time. I'm going to end with a story. It's story time. So feel free, relax. Jacob, don't fall asleep or anything. But relax. I'm going to tell a quick story, and then we'll take about 10 minutes in our and spread out, get some music, and self-reflect. So, my story. So we aren't the first group of people to do a series like this, spending several nights looking at what Jesus had to say and stories from his life, and ask the types of questions that I've laid out on this forum. There was a first group, though, and it didn't look very far off from how our group looks. About the same age, young adults, a mixed bag of people, personalities, and backgrounds and experiences. Some were fully convinced about who Jesus was and what he taught, and there were others who were skeptical, and there was everyone in between as well. This group actually did life with Jesus. They would listen to him teach, share meals with him, go on long walks with him, camp out with him. They got to know him really well, and things were actually going really well for this group. Everything one night, though, took a really dark turn. A group of men showed up and actually arrested Jesus. And powerful people were really upset with him and anyone that would associate themselves with Jesus. They wanted to put an end to Jesus and his followers, so Jesus was sentenced to death on a cross. That group that was following Jesus and doing life with him got very alarmed and scared. Rightly so. Most of them decided that it was no longer worth it to be associated with him anymore. And when Jesus was killed, they were defeated. A lot of them actually ended up going back to their old lives or their old professions. But the story doesn't end there, because fast forward a few decades, that same group shows back up on the scene for Jesus. Everything is equally, if not more so, hostile as when Jesus was arrested. But the group is traveling around and spreading the story of Jesus and gathering others to join the movement. Several of them were eventually murdered in even more gruesome ways than Jesus was. So what happened in these people's lives? One moment they were running away in fear, rejecting association with Jesus, to a couple decades later, running into hostile situations, not afraid to die, to proclaim the name and teachings of Jesus. That's a very drastic change. So what changed in these people's lives? And the change that took place was actually sparked by an event. And that event was Jesus being resurrected. Jesus rose from the dead and actually visited this group. And seeing the resurrected Jesus solidified and validated all of his teachings and set flame to the movement of his followers, and was the beginning of what today we call Christianity. So it's possible to think, thinking about our group, well, forget that first group. They actually got to see Jesus as a person and even got to see him and talk to him after he was resurrected. That's, what about us? Why doesn't Jesus do that for us? Well, Jesus actually addressed that. And this is something that he said to that group, and he was actually speaking about us, about this group. He said, "You believe because you have seen. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." So we are not disadvantaged at all in this group compared to that first group. And the same teachings and the same stories about Jesus' life are equally as transformative and applicable to our lives as they were 2,000 years ago to that first group that was following Jesus. So that's why I'm super stoked to dive into this series, 7 Thursday nights this winter, to look at the different stories from Jesus' life. I think it's going to be I really believe it's going to be an impactful series for all of us. Okay? Well, let me pray. And then we can spread out, and maybe we'll get some music going, and we can just reflect on those questions before we dive into some discussion tables. Dear God, thank you so much that we have this time and space to come here and just reflect on who you are and reflect on how you're working in our lives. I pray that no matter where we find ourselves on that spectrum of belief about Jesus, that we would know that this is a safe space and that we can feel at home here, and God, we're in the right place. And I just pray that you would speak to all of us individually. I know you will. And bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen.